and the Center for International Higher Education at Boston College. It is a real pleasure to have each of you with us. And before we start, I just have a little bit of housekeeping. The first point that I would like to remind you of is that this is a 90-minute webinar. This will allow us to have extensive Q&A, and I will be going over some of the details of our dynamics for today's webinar. So the first thing that I would like to invite you to do, if you haven't done so, is to mute your microphone and also to turn off your camera. This is very important so that we can try to maintain the quality of our call and most of the bandwidth with our presenters today. So that's going to be very important that we keep both microphones and cameras closed to avoid disruptions. And also, it's an important point to remind you that this session is going to be recorded, and the session is going to be posted for our colleagues to review at a later time on YouTube. We are going to be distributing the recording for today's session online. So please, this is also another reason to close your cameras if you prefer to do so for different, just to make sure that you're not being recorded. And also, as I mentioned, to give all of our full attention to our presenters. Also, how we invite you to use the chat function so that you can post your questions. We are going to be monitoring the chat throughout the entire session. So this is an important consideration because you don't need to wait until the end of the session to post your questions. So the questions will remain there. Also, we had more than 300 participants registered for today's webinar. This makes a little complex to manage. This is why we have to utilize the chat function for your questions, and we are not able to turn on cameras and microphones to pose the questions. Instead, we encourage you to post them in the chat so that we can also group them thematically and present them to our panelists. In this sense, we also want to just give a quick overview about the dynamics of our webinar. We have 4 wonderful panelists, but before we turn over the microphone to them, it is my pleasure to welcome all of our panelists. They are in the order of their presentations: Ntimi Mtawa from the University of Dar es Salaam, Willem van Winden from the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences, along with Marianne Cunningham from the University of Groningen. We also welcome Jeannette Velez from Global Actions and Solutions and former Chancellor of the Universidad del Rosario in Colombia. Before we turn it over to our panelists, I would like to turn it over to my dear colleague, Giorgio Marinoni, for a welcome message from the International Association of Universities. Giorgio, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Gerardo. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you, wherever you are from the world, listening to us today. It's a great pleasure for me as Manager for Internationalization at the International Association of Universities to welcome all of you to this webinar organized together with the Center for International Education at Boston College in the framework of the Future of Higher Education webinar series. This webinar series actually was launched already in 2020 at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, and was an idea that we had together, the International Association of Universities and the Center for International Education. And we launched it with 3 webinars at the time on the future of higher education, the future of higher education in developing countries, and the future of internationalization of higher education. And now, after almost 3 years, the series went on. We are still collaborating with the Center for International Education, and we are doing webinars like this one together, but we are also doing other webinars in the framework of this Future of Education series. And we reach now more than 40 webinars organized over these 3 years. And today's webinar, I think, is touching a very important topic, which is the connection between internationalization and community engagement. And I'm personally very much looking forward to listen to the speakers today and to engage to a fruitful discussion with all of you. So thank you very much for being here, and let's enjoy the webinar together. Gerardo, back to you.
Thank you very much, Giorgio. I should also mention what a great pleasure it is to collaborate with our colleagues from IAU in this joint webinar. So thank you very much for this opportunity and this collaboration. That being said, I would like to now turn it over to our colleague Ntimi Mtawa, who will be presenting his perspective on university community engagement and internationalization. And Ntimi, I'll be sharing the screen for you from my end. So please take it away.
Thank you, Gerardo. Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you so much. I'm quite new at University of Dar es Salaam after spending about 17 years in South Africa. So I bring different perspective of South Africa, and also bring in the Tanzanian perspective as well. And my background has very much been in higher education, drawing on this idea of community engagement as a third leg of alongside teaching and research. Which are, if I use Barton Clark's word, those are core technologies of universities, or core business of universities. And I'm not going to dwell so much on those philosophies of, community engagement. For me, when I got the invitation of, to look at the link between community engagement, university community engagement, and internationalization, and I was like, oh, wow, this is very interesting. I haven't really explored much this notion or idea of internationalization, but it's something that I've read. I've seen a lot of work by different scholars, some of the leading scholars, Jeannette and others. So I went back and tried to look at some of the work or scholarly work on internationalization and see where do we find this link. Does it even exist? Or can it even exist? Those are questions I was trying to ask. What would be the dimension of this relationship? And when we talk about internationalization, what does it mean in African context? What does it constitute? So that question I've been trying to ask myself. So next slide. So I won't, as I said, I won't dwell so much on some of the philosophical questions about community engagement or internationalization. My focus will be more of sharing my own experience, as I said, spending so much time in South Africa, researching higher education, engaging with different scholars in the field, but also, trying to understand, this concept of internationalization from South African point of view. African higher education point of view, what does it mean? And recently I was talking to a friend who is a director of internationalization at University of Dar es Salaam, and I was shocked, the way they look at this concept. And my quick observation was, when you have international students coming in or visiting, for them that's internationalization. And I feel like, oh, there's more to that. I think we need to expand this notion. We need to look at it from a broader sense, not narrow down just when you have student mobility, then you have internationalization. Yes, it's part of it. But then the biggest question is, from community engagement point of view, what would that mean? What would be the mixes? What would be some of the examples? And I think that's a question. That's a question we're trying to respond to in this today's webinar. Next slide, please. So if you look at the the concept of community engagement, or university community engagement, especially in African context, there are a number of questions which also go beyond African way of looking at this concept. There are a number of debate and you know, about what does it mean for community engagement, to talk about community engagement. What does it mean? So some of the questions, if you read the literature, which are still, you know, they require us to respond to, is the issue of definition or annex. There's so much question about what does it mean, community engagement, what does it mean? And what's the link between community engagement and research? Should we treat these three legs differently? Or should we treat them as one leg? Do they speak to each other? And if they do, in what ways? How do teaching speak to community engagement? And how do research speak to community engagement? Or how do we see them as one scholarship? And if you look at, you bring in the work of Ernest Boyer, who is credited to be one of the leading scholar in this university community engagement. I think he tried to unpack that in a very nuanced way. Of course, time has changed. By the time he wrote that piece. So now, how do we see that? And how do we link university community engagement to teaching and research? But what would be the, when we do that linkage, what are those dimensions that we need to be looking at? But also there's a question of what does it constitute? You know, that question, especially in African literature, that question is always popping up. What does community engagement constitute? What are the elements? What are the activities that one will say now, this is community engagement? And the question becomes even more complex when we treat community engagement as something which is divorced from the other core functions of university. But also there are questions about the philosophies that underpin community engagement, and especially in the global south, especially in Africa. And recently my colleague and myself and my colleagues we wrote a book where one of the comments we got from the reviewer was, we often try to look at community engagement from global north. And I don't like using this concept of global north, but we have to use them. We always want to look at community engagement from global north point of view of philosophies or theories, but there are so many philosophical underpinnings or theories that are based in global south that can help us to understand more from our own point of view, or from global south, or from African point of view. But what are those, and how do they look like? How does it speak to the global north philosophies or theories? But also questions about neutrality and reciprocity. There's so much discussion and debate about, what would be the approach to engagement, and issues of reciprocity, neutrality, who benefits more. And that's, I think, is still dominating the African context. And because of the nature of engagement and nature of society, nature of community, but also the ivory tower nature of universities is still very dominant. But also the contextual element of underpinning community engagement, because this notion is very much context specific, because it had to do with the history of universities. It had to do with the condition under which this institution operates, and how that determines the relationship between the university and the local milieu. So those are questions that still, or debate still exist. But now when you bring in the concept of internationalization, it's a misconception about what does it mean. And as I say, for instance, in Tanzanian context, when you talk about internationalization to colleagues on the corridor, the point is all about, we bring in students from Europe, for instance. They visit us. That's where internationalization is happening. But I think, as I said, we need to expand the concept. We need to have better understanding of, as a university, which is a knowledge production institution, which is a teaching and learning institution. How do we expand our understanding of internationalization? Now, going to the question, the next slide, please. Now going to the question of definitional issues, and I try to look at Carnegie Foundation definition, which most of people normally refers to, although we need also to, expand it, especially when you bring in international dimension. That how can we make the definition more speak to global issues without excluding local issues? And I think that global element of this definition is very much important to think about, how community engagement can be something that not only speak about local issues, but also global issues that, connect us, or that, affect the global, global society. Go back to the next slide, please. Yes, but also this notion of internationalization is very much also debatable in literature, and I try to look at some of the definitions, which may help us to begin to understand, the linkage that one begin to unpack, or one begin to flag out in this definition. So when you look at the definition of internationalization is an intercultural or global, global dimension into purpose, function or delivery of post-secondary education. What are those intercultural issues? What are those international elements that can speak to community engagement? And I think for me, that's where the gist, or that's where the issue are. And I added my own thinking of saying, when you talk about internationalization, it's the global connectedness in and through higher education, which now when we bring in university community engagement, we begin to unpack those elements and become more clear to us. Next slide, please. So going back to the question then, which I think is for me is central, is what's the relationship then between university community engagement and internationalization? What's some of the example and experience? And I'm going to share in an abstract way, but also using some of my own experience of working in this area of engagement in South Africa, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. Next slide. So when you look at university community engagement, as I said, I made this point that if we treat university community engagement as a knowledge project, or as something which is done or is conducted by a knowledge producing institution, become more easy. But also, if we look at community engagement as something that can help us to address global common issues, become more easy to link the two. But if we treat it as a global, so as a local, as a local project, which is only done for a particular university, for a particular community, which were very much located in a particular context or locality, it becomes more problematic in my view. And if you look at the literature, the notion of community engagement and internationalization, they're discussed in a very distinct way. They often, it's not actually linked. And I was trying to look at the literature to see is something which has been explored, to see if there's any relationship. I couldn't get much of the link between the two. It's often, they're always discussed as divorced or as concepts which don't speak to each other. But I think it's our opportunity now and responsibility to see how do we merge the two, or how do we link the two. Next slide, please. So I try to look at what are some of the areas, or some of the examples, or some of the dimensions that may help us to link the two. And for me, one of the issues that is important is, as I said, is to treat university community engagement as a knowledge production project, which now help us to begin to look at university. As I said, these are university knowledge producing institutions. So if we treat community engagement as a knowledge project, then that helps us to begin to think about, okay, how do we then bring in the international dimension from universal community engagement, but from a knowledge point of view. And in African context, this question, even in South Africa, this question has always been there to say, is community engagement as a knowledge production project, or is just a charity way of helping communities, especially poor communities? Those questions are still, very much strong in the literature, but also in the policy and also in different discussions. So if we do that, for me, I feel like that's where we begin to look at community engagement and the internationalization as things that speak to each other. But also, if we treat it as a teaching and learning mechanisms or vehicle to promote teaching and learning, but not only for a local way of thinking, but at a global level. But what are those elements? How do we manage this? How do we use this as a space to do so? But if we do that, then we may begin to link at international level. How do we use community engagement? But what kind, and how we speak to international dimension of, but putting without forgetting or taking into consideration that the university are also very much locally embedded. But also, if we treat community engagement as a mechanism to address global common challenge, for instance, at UCL in London, they do have this Transforming University for Climate Change program, which they draw a lot from community engagement, and they do have partners across African universities. For me, that's a very good example of how do we frame community engagement as the ways or the pathway to addressing global issues such as climate change, because that speaks to global issues, but from a different point of view, without forgetting those local elements that drive or that may impede university community engagement. Next slide, please. Another important element that I do draw a lot in my writing as well, and I saw that even in South Africa, which is very strong, is how do we treat community engagement as a way through which we can cultivate global citizenship, drawing from the idea of like Martha Nussbaum, where she speaks about global citizenship, training our graduates to think about, not only think about local issues, but also issues beyond the borders of their countries, and there's so much literature on international service learning, for instance, service learning being one of the subset of community engagement. You talk about, students going to different countries to learn about, to experience about different culture, different way of doing things, but also to meet different people, to understand how people do different things in different contexts. So for me, that would be another way of thinking about, the link between universal community engagement and internationalization. But also this decolonization debate or agenda of higher education. How can we use community engagement as a space for decolonizing, curriculum, decolonizing with the way we think, decolonizing the way we frame our teaching and learning, but at a global level. So I think that's another way in which we could link the two. But also as a pathway to, enhance staff and student mobility, this exchange, should the exchange be only about going to a different country, for a particular academic program, or should be beyond that, experiencing, learning different kind of, theories, culture, and other things. So I think for me, that's another way in which we need to be thinking about the link between community engagement and internationalization. But also the issue of global South paradigm or philosophy. There's been so much, push to, enhance global South paradigm or philosophy way of thinking into, put them into global picture. Without discarding global North theories, because they've already given us a point of departure to understand community engagement. But how do we then bring in global South theories? That's, we see how do they speak to each other? How do we use community engagement then as a way of, bringing in or putting to the fore global South philosophies, but also issue of partnership. But what kind of partnership? What will be the approach? What will be the trigger? But how about the issue of power dynamics? What kind of collaboration can we have from community engagement point of view, which is sensitive to, or which are sensitive to local issues, but also bring in element of international dimension, you know? Next slide, please. I'm toward the end. So just to conclude, as I said, I'm speaking in a very abstract sense, but those are some of the examples I feel like we need to explore more. And for me, this has given me a different way of thinking about, okay, if universities share similar kind of features in terms of knowledge production, in terms of, you know, being intellectual space where people debate, new ideas are emerged, then how do we bring in this, the nexus between community engagement and internationalization? And, you know, it's only through trying to think about what are the common issues that can be, you know, discussed, can be addressed through this community engagement, but also from international point of view. But bring in that international interconnectedness, which benefit global society, not only Tanzania, not only Africa, but also that can benefit Europe, can benefit America and other contexts. For instance, if you go to South America, they speak about servicio, if I'm not mistaken, service, which even in South Africa is very strong. In Tanzania, is very strong in different ways. But how do we bring that at international level and become more mutually beneficial to different contexts? So the nexus is there, as I said, but it needs to be framed in a very different way, which speak to universities as global institutions, which speak to each other and have common features. Next, please. The last slide. So as I say, there's so much potential. There are so many potential links, but I think they need to be explored further, and the clear indicators or dimensions need to be established. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ntimi. And now we are going to turn it over to our colleagues, Willem and Marian. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Gerardo, for this introduction and for having us here. Marian, can you try to share the slides? Yes, there they are. So Marian and I are both from the Netherlands, and we did a study on community engagement and internationalization in the context of a broader study on the internationalization of medium-sized cities and universities in Europe. And this presentation, we'll try to keep it short, but we will give you some insight into from the practices of internationalization of universities in the context of European cities and what they are doing, and also the kind of tensions that are emerging between community engagement and internationalization. And we will also offer some examples of how those tensions can be addressed, and also some practices of how European cities are and universities are dealing with those tensions. Next slide, please. So we have two contributions, actually two books that we worked on. The first you see on the left is a handbook on strategic city-university cooperation. This is part of a European network in which cities and universities are members as tandems. So the whole purpose of this network, with about 23 or 25 members, is to explore how cities and universities can collaborate to enhance the local community, and at the same time also promote the core values of the university, like education, research, and innovation and engagement. So here we have written a handbook full of concrete examples how cities and local communities and universities are collaborating strategically in this field. And the second one I refer to is our recent book that came out last year, Cities for Talent, in which we explore a lot of good practices for internationalization in medium-sized cities. Next slide, please. So on this slide, we listed some tensions that you might run into and that we've seen in our research in European cities between the internationalization of universities on the one hand, and I'm very glad that Ntimi just gave a more comprehensive view on internationalization far beyond just incoming mobility. It's much more than that. And on the other hand, the local and the regional needs, the needs of local communities. And one thing you see well, I have to say in our book, we mainly focused on talent, international mobility, incoming student, and the internationalization of universities from that perspective. We've seen in Europe a lot of cities, and especially in the Netherlands, a huge increase in the number of international students. And especially in smaller or medium-sized cities like Groningen or Ghent or Parma in Italy, for example, this influx of international people, international students of the last 1-2 decades puts pressure on already tight housing markets. And you have to see this in a context of rising house prices, a lot of complaints from local people, young people who cannot afford houses, but also local students from the national territory of the provinces having difficulty to find student housing. And so here, internationalization puts a further pressure on tight housing markets. A second point, that's especially in the Netherlands, where we see a lot of English language bachelor and master studies, is that this shift, you might say it, Anglification of bachelor and master education. A lot of crowding, more students coming in, and this also leads to tension and political debates whether or not internationalization is sort of crowding out the spaces for the local students. Then there is the third point, is the local people in the city. In some cases, we see some alienation, especially of lower educated people in cities that feel sort of disconnected from this international ambitions of the university and the city. They just don't see always like what's in it for them, and they don't feel engaged with it. So it's really an issue how to connect with them. A fourth point is local engagement strategies from universities. We see in Europe a clear tendency to use education and research more to address local challenges. For example, we have a huge challenge regarding the energy transformation. We see an increasing number of universities developing programs with student teams addressing specific local issues concerning that. And many other things are happening like that, for example, working with elderly people or with youth or whatever. And then the question is, where do the international students fit in there? And here the language can be a problem, especially in Europe, where most incoming international students are, well, they speak English, but they don't speak the local language. So it's harder to engage them in these local engagement programs that are growing and that are very important. Then a point is the international bubble. So that's a tension we saw in a lot of places, universities and cities, that international students tend to stick together, or probably you may recognize that. And it's hard to really mix them substantially with locals in order to get that intercultural exchange. And finally, we have the populist rhetoric, unfortunately growing in many places against foreigners, which can make it also, well, you could say it's a tension to have this internationalization and local engagement connected to each other. And now I hand over to Marian to continue the presentation on how these tensions can be solved and what policies and what approaches we have seen in European cities and universities to address these issues. So Marian.
Thank you so much, Willem. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Is that it?
Yes,
yeah?
we hear you well.
Great. Okay, thanks. And thanks for that fantastic introduction, Ntimi, that I think has set the stage very well for what we wanted to share. And thanks, Willem, for mentioning these tensions. So yeah, what we thought was interesting to, as Willem said, focus on was the potential for the tension between internationalization on the one hand and universities playing this civic role and contributing to the local or regional context on the other hand. And as Willem sketched, this can play out in these various ways. And then we wanted to talk about, okay, so how do we address this? And actually rather look to find synergy between university community engagement and processes of internationalization. And we've got some suggestions for this. There's already been a mentioning in the chat of globalization as being a potentially helpful concept here. And I think that that's absolutely right, that there's a lot of potential when we look at it from a global perspective, which is to say connecting, also as Ntimi already said, global connectedness through HE and using community engagement as a means to address global common challenges. So really looking at not as a sort of push and pull between internationalization and community engagement, but finding the right form to make that more of a synergetic relationship. In the work that we've done for our books, we saw that what is really important is to work in partnership with local organizations. So I'll mention that in a minute in more detail. But this is definitely not something that the university can do by itself. We feel that this is something that really needs to be done in a broader partnership. And also, ideally, is coupled to the strategic agenda and the strategic perspective of those partners and of those stakeholders in this process. So that is something which is not always in place. It can be quite piecemeal to start with, but there's a lot more synergy to be gained if it's looked at from a strategic perspective in the first place. I'm going to just move on to some examples of what we've done, for instance, here in Groningen. I'm sorry, I'm trying to pause this GIF, but I'm not sure how to do that. So I'm just going to have to put up with this now. Two examples of where we think successful community engagement has taken place and illustrate, I think, sort of proof of concept of how this can be a synergetic relationship with internationalization processes. And the first example I want to mention is within the higher education setting, and that is a minor on public health, which I recently worked on. And what characterizes this minor is that it's a joint program, so it is for Dutch and international students, so not a separate parallel program. And within the minor, there is much emphasis on working in mixed teams, so mixed in terms of disciplines as well as cultural background. So making sure that each team has international and Dutch students in it. And then the minor is characterized by its focus on a regional challenge. So it's a minor in public health, looking at how to generate more healthy years. And each team of students in that minor works with societal partners who actually give them an assignment for a regional challenge in healthcare. So very, very regionally focused, but engaging international students. And international students are able, therefore, to bring in their experience and background to help that the knowledge base in that minor, but also, of course, get to know the regional context better. This kind of program is, I think, also helpful because it's thinking about the longer term, which is something I'll come back to, in the sense that in Groningen, there is a strong need to retain some international students for the local labor market. So there's an interest in local in labor market integration, but that is not something which will happen by itself. So programs like this can also be a step towards local labor market integration by introducing international students to local partners and helping them to build a network. In the city, I wanted to give the example of City Central, which is here pictured. This was the team of City Central from a couple of years ago, which was already a hub for internationalization, but with the explicit aim of creating contact between international or local groups with the aim of mutually beneficial activities. We know that increasing diversity can lead to reduced social cohesion, and City Central had as its absolute primary aim to counteract that potential loss of social cohesion and isolation, which Willem has talked about. So we had a lot of different programs within the City Central. One I wanted to highlight was a language project, which I think illustrates also the sort of synergy that can be found between internationalization and community outreach or community engagement. And that was a very nice part of a language program that we ran. We have vocational students in Groningen who are at the vocational colleges, and they often do internships in the region and specifically also over the border in Germany. And to do these internships, they need to speak reasonable German, but they often don't. They have problems getting their German practice before they go and do internships, and this is a barrier for them to do internships. We also have a lot of German students studying in Groningen, and many of them came to us wanting to be involved with some kind of volunteering, but they don't speak Dutch, or they speak very limited Dutch. And what we did there was we paired German students with these vocational students who needed to practice their German. And so there was this a language buddy program, which is, of course, helping the German students to get to know the local context, meet some really local people, and make a contribution to the local context, and at the same time is benefiting the vocational students who otherwise would not come into contact with these university students. So I think that's a nice, very small example of how these can be really mutually beneficial processes. And just to reiterate the key factors which are at play here, these kind of programs need to be aligned with the strategic agenda and with partners who are involved in that strategic agenda. In the case of Groningen, Groningen has quite a unique partnership with called the Accord of Groningen, in which all the higher education institutes, as well as the local and provincial government, are involved, and that very much are designed for mutual engagement and benefit. So in my perspective is that we need to kind of redesign our social life, and this is what we mean about finding the right form to facilitate these kinds of contacts and engagements, and also to consider the longer term. So international students are not necessarily just here for 3 years. They might want to stay in the region. They could benefit the region beyond their study, take that into account when thinking about community engagement. I think that's all we wanted to share for now. We've got books if you would be interested in getting one, and of course they're open access, so you can also get them through the links in the slides. For now, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Marian and Willem. I was just catching from the chat, it looks like some of our attendees were indeed enjoying the image that was changing. So that added a little more of visual appeal. So sometimes there are happy accidents, right? So I would now like to welcome Jeannette Velez. She was having some trouble connecting, but she's now with us. She is from Global Actions and Solutions and former Chancellor of Universidad del Rosario. Jeannette, welcome, and it's so nice to see you. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gerardo, and thank you, the IAU and the CIHE Boston College for this invitation and to participate in this panel that I think is really important in this moment, but also it's really near of my heart, because that was part of the things that I developed at the university when I used to work at the Rosario University. But before answering the guiding question that what is the relationship between university community engagement and internationalization, I would like to give the panel and give the floor and a vision of what's happening in Latin America, and how deeply the concept of community engagement that we call here social responsibility, it's immersed in what we are doing and the universities are doing in the moment. It's all we remember, and Neil mentioned some things that I just hear the last part of his presentation. What happens in Latin America is that almost all the universities is the concept's relatively new. It begins to be systematized in the 2000 and began to put in words what the university has been done for a long time. And normally it was linked to the third function of the universities, that's extension or outreach, that it's called like that. But in reality, it's more than that. As in the enterprises, the concept overpass the concept of philanthropy and the concept of doing things well, because doing things well is the minimum that we have to do. It's going farther, and it's changing the way the universities are doing the things internally, and doing the things that affect the teaching, the research, the management of the university, and also the way that we use internationalization as a lever to promote and to really force the education of and prepare students globally competent. And well, so I think it was just like I mentioned that was a function linked to the outreach, that it was with the national councils of accreditation, not only from Colombia but for all Latin America. It was just measured with the normal activities that outreach was making: continuing education, consulting, and things like are the normal activities. But that doesn't mean that you are engaged with the community or the social responsibility. So the there are a lot of networks in Latin America that are working this moment in social responsibility. The Latin American Network of Social Responsibility of CLADEA in 2000, that was created in 2020, and it was it's directed to generate research and generate a positive impact in the business, schools, and society. The AUSFAL, that is the network of the Jesuits community, the Ursula, that was established in 2016 with 170 members of universities and ONGs, that is founded by the Andean Development Corporation. Ursula has developed two research about what is the state of art of the social responsibility in Latin America. One was done in 2018 and the other in 2019. And the results, just to mention, they are really low conception of social responsibility inside the universities, at least in documents, at least in the principles. And a study conducted by Ricardo Gaeta from the Universidad of Antofagasta of Chile, and Juliana Alvarez from Juárez Autonomous University in Mexico, they try to find in the members of the Ursula and the members of the AUSHAL if they have the proposal of the social responsibility immersed in the mission and the vision of the universities. And what they found is that it's a really low number of or percentage of institutions that really have that concept immersed in that. So in the national level, we can mention, I will mention ASCUN, that is the Association of Universities of Colombia, that give a definition that the social responsibility develops when an organization becomes aware of itself, its environment, and its role in its environment. And I think that's the key point of the social responsibility or the engagement with the community. And it's part of what Canarias, Pratt, and Campbell began to talk about, first about the third helix, then the fourth helix, and then the fifth helix of the way of producing knowledge. That maybe Niels tried to make the approach, and I agree with that, is the new way of producing knowledge. And the new way of producing knowledge is taking the community as part, as a producer of the knowledge. And with that in mind, is different. It's not an object of study, it's part of what, of the persons of the community that is making part of producing knowledge. And for me, that's the key point of everything. It's a changing what the universities are doing in the normal way, that it's I work and make research, teach in my ivory tower, and I am the one that knows, and I am the one that goes to make projects. But when I arrive to make the project, I'm the one that knows and have the solution, discharging the problems, that the real problems that the community has. And maybe they have the solutions. Maybe they have the points to work out the solutions and the research that the advance that we need. The second point that I would like to mention in this moment is that we are in a moment in the world where we have a dichotomy. There's a huge development in technology, all the advances. There are a lot of countries that have already overpassed the poverty. The quality of life in many countries is much better. But at the same time, we have poverty, inequality, climate change, disruption in so many areas that are global problems, and that are global problems that affects the people in different ways. It's not the same to talk about climate change in a developed country that to climate change in a undeveloped in a developed country. That it's something that we have to take in care when we are working, and that we are making the approach to community, and we're making the approach to the research that has to be done, taking in care the community and the territory where the universities and institutions are located in this moment. So what I think is that international, for answering, just for answer the question, obviously the connection between internationalization and local and local engagement or social engagement, it's all because internationalization, as our friend Hans David says, it's the way of the process of institutional change designed to strategically and practically advance in higher education institutions in the three core missions. If internationalization do in a good way its work, the social engagement or the community engagement will be better, and will be better done with the communities. And there are a lot of examples in Latin America. There's a lot of examples of what the people is doing, and connected not only in the local spaces, because the problems are global. The climate change is global. The technological gaps are global. The problems in education, hunger, peace are global. There are, I don't remember how many words are in this moment in the world, but there are the displaced people. It's the migration. It's are thematics that are really, really important in this moment, and that we have to find solutions that are not only used in one place, but can be used in different countries and in different situations. So I make emphasis in that it's more than extension, the social engagement. It's working directly with the communities, and it's producing knowledge in a different way, making part and co-producing knowledge. With internationalization, what's the paper? The paper is, as we say, we have to prepare globally competent students. To have globally competent students, we have to have globally competent professors, staff, and the administrative areas of the institution. If we don't have that, it's impossible to prepare global engagement people. And it's simple how a city works with, for example, the problem of mobility. Just for telling you an example, in Bogota, in the downtown of Bogota, there are 18 universities. 18 universities that receives almost 100,000 students per day with all the problems of mobility that you can imagine. That's a problem that's locally, that it's specific, but that touch the way the students respond to the local problems. But that's one specific example. So the the examples that I can mention in different ways is, for example, one related to peace that is called Utopia. Utopia is a project of the Universidad La Salle, and that 9 years ago, they put a branch in the university in a farm near a city called Yopal in the Casanare department, that is like a state in the States. It was a region with armed conflict, so they create the only rural university campus. The students that they select are part of the women and men that resign to the guerrilla or to the paramilitarism or displaced or uprooted people. The students have the compromise to return to their homeland and implement a productive project from what they learn at the university. That title of the diploma is delivered by the Universidad de La Salle, and the government, and they work with the local governments, with the international participation in developing research between the different institutions, national, internationally. They have professors, they have staff, and they have students that come from abroad just to make a stash at the university. The methodology that they apply is in the academic programs, in learning to doing and teaching by demonstrating, and is the peace laboratory and model of peace and rural development. They have more than six, they begin 9 years. I count in those 9 years the construction, they buy the land, they make the construction, and now they are working with 28 departments and with 210 municipalities in Colombia. And while they have more than 173 projects already applied in the different municipalities where the students came from. And so that's a part, and they have also the systematization of the project that you can watch in the web. Other examples of what we are doing and Latin America is doing, it's called Uniminuto, is a university that covers almost all of the municipalities of Colombia, almost all, no, it's 86 municipalities of Colombia, and they arrive there, and the compromise is that when they open a branch, they never close it, and they work with the most advantaged people, with the lower advantaged people in Colombia, and they have a huge number of actions in community engagement. One of them is with the Tech of Monterrey, that did advise mothers victims of violence who have a cooperative of food plants products in a village near Ibagué, that is a city in other department. Here, the students and international teams made the improvement of the business plan, commercialization, and also the prototyping that complies with the norms of food commercialization in Colombia. The SENA, that is the institution for education for work, also participate with the technical training of the people. And to mention that the model of Uniminuto, it's already exported to the Côte d'Ivoire, the Ivory Coast, exported, and it's with the financiation of France and the same university. Other example that we can mention is the University of Veracruz that work with the curricular transformation for schools, including the indigenous cosmovision schools of Bogota and schools of Veracruz. And they work with that with a model that's called they work with the solving problems method, and well they already have the help of an association Columbus that has the academic hubs that create that type of projects. The one I see that Sandra is in the panel. And the one is the University Antonio Nariño, has a part of an Erasmus project from migration to integration. They collaborate with different ONGs in Europe and in Africa, the Myanmar-based charity-oriented, and some universities just to facilitate the integration of young people, individuals working with migrants and refugees, and facilitate the integration. The results are diverse and well, the results that they really show the results that impact the internationalization. Report the migrants scenario of Colombia from the 2020 to the 21. They create a Friends Without Borders program, that training program with a systematization of materials and experience for exchange, job shadowing. It was an interdisciplinary perspective, intercultural understanding, has a global collaboration and a new partnership mobility of 7 internationalization on campus with more than 327 participants and 2,000 reproductions of the MIG events. The activity involvement of the one community. They did it in 3 cities, 7 academic programs involved, 11 faculty members, 30 students, and 2 alumni. This is the way that really creates knowledge and can be spread in different areas. Personally, I participate in the ALAS project, where there were the participation of Mexico City, Lima, Quito, Madrid, Belo Horizonte, Medellin, Cités Unis France, Montevideo, the University of Rosario, that was the only university participating in the project, the Prefectura of Rio de Janeiro, Aricat, Yucatan. The project aims the internationalization of the local governments, from the legal framework to the construction of the strategic plan. And it was really interesting to mention those tensions that were just mentioned by the previous panelists, that are really interesting, because the other actors, the other part of the communities, sometimes they think the university is just talking about things that are really academic, but in the practice they are really difficult to put on. And at the same time, it was a challenge for the university to really learn what the problems of the city were and how they want to make an internationalization plan, but where are the problems internally and externally with a community that didn't understand why I have to pay part of my taxes to make an internationalization of a city. What is the added value of that? And so, that's part of
No
the
veo que
tensions.
tengas ninguna app
And
llamada WhatsApp. Puedes intentar buscarla en App Store.
I sorry. And so that was a really interesting project. Other project that we did, we work with SAMU. SAMU is the system of, uh, of health that make attend the people when they have problems in emergencies. And when we arrived there, mentioned the tensions, they asked, but why a university is trying to make projects and try to work with this type of situations? And we said, well, it's because we are part of the environment. We are part of the regions. And so we are part of the solution. We have to try to work with the solutions and more with that type of global problems that has to be solved, and have to be solved in a way that we can work together. The project that the one did is really interesting because it's about migration, and the migration, it's really difficult to understand and really difficult to assess, because trying to give some solutions to those problems of the migration, for example, including the people that arrives in the universities or in the schools, they maybe sometimes will generate more another different type of problems that we have to learn to solve. And so the exchange of experience of what the way to we receive, we solve the problems, it's really important. And internationalization works with what? Works with the research, with teaching, internationalization of the curriculum, how to make the basic and the soft skills that the people need to be globally competent and to understand what they are doing when they are working in the different type of projects. We did a really
Jeannette,
interesting.
if we could begin wrapping up, we want to make sure that we have time for Q&A.
Okay, yes. So sorry, I was expecting that you tell me to finish, because I have like 10 more examples of what Latin America is doing in that type of work. But I will result. The importance of the internationalization is to be a leverage to do the type of work that they have to do with curriculum, with research, and with extension, just to make the real search of the type of projects that will be interested for the institution, to look for the partnerships and to look and work for that kind of partnerships in a correct way, to identify which will be and work with the faculty, which are the indicators of results that they want to take. And obviously that will help the university to really participate and solve all the global problems that we are facing in this moment and that we have to work out. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for these remarks. And we will make sure that maybe we have an opportunity to go back to some of these examples as the Q&A unfolds. I am sure they will be able to illustrate many of these points. I would like to invite all of our panelists now to maybe come back. We will make sure that we spotlight all of you, but also we have a very dynamic chat if you have been able to follow. I want to first of all apologize if we don't get to all of the questions. We have many intriguing points, and I would like to start with a few of these considerations. Well, first of all, before we turn it over to the Q&A, once again, thank you, Ntimi, Willem, Marian, and Jeannette for your remarks, for your sharing your perspectives. And I thought what really strikes me across the different perspectives that you share is that truly we have perspectives that are representative of different contexts, different size of cities, different national and regional contexts that actually enriches our conversation. And in fact, I would like to start the Q&A with that. There was a lot of conversation, certainly, around sort of the benefits, right? In some ways, one of the perspectives that is resonating across several of the questions is perhaps the tension, on the one hand, between engaging with local communities, right? Many of the examples that have been shared, a lot of the perspectives that you are advocating for, but on the other hand, what seems to be a tension between these local concerns and local communities with what we could characterize as global competition. There have been references in the chat, for example, about global rankings and performing well in these global rankings with a focus more on research and publications, and in many different ways, focusing on the activities that universities in the global north or in the west, sometimes we use different terminology, but what they're doing. And in a way, particularly for global south universities, there is clearly a tension and a matter of priorities. the question I would like to pose to all of you is, do you see this as a tension, first and foremost? And if so, how can university leaders go about managing these competing demands? I wonder if we have any takers to begin with. We can go in any order that you would like.
Well, no one. Well, I think it's a tension. It really is a tension, and it's a tension because there in this moment. I think in this moment today, I'm talking about today. There's a lack of trust in what everyone is doing. Not only universities, but we don't have trust in the government. We don't have trust in the enterprises. We don't have trust in anything. And that's a youth. The youth, they don't believe in everything in this moment. So we have to make advances and to convince working with the community, you have to make commitments. But when you don't have trust, it's really hard to make commitments. Yes, and that's a big tension that is happening today in the relationship with the environment. Not only because they think the universities are really far from the reality. The same students said, I just finished my career, my diploma, and I don't know what to do. I'm not prepared to work in reality. I have a lot of things and I need a different type of education. So there's something that we have to work, and we have to work with all the communities, not only to work with the universities, we have to work with the community. In making the links, I read the mapping report. They talk about the bridges and that we have to create between communities and the community in the large space conception and universities. And so we have to begin to really find ways to strengthen those bridges.
Are there other perspectives in these perceived tensions?
Yes.
Okay, so let's go with Ntimi and then Willem. Does that sound okay? Ntimi, please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Branko. I think before even you talk about the international dimension of engagement or university, moving into global or international space, I think there is a tension at local level, first of all, which we need to not ignore. There's always a tension between the local community and the university, local university in terms of what is this university for? Why does it exist here? There's always that tension, which we need not to ignore. Because, the nature of universities themselves, how do they operate? How do they function? There's always that, treating local community as a space for research, as a space to gather information. That partneristic way of thinking about community is always very strong. So that tension is always there, and it has been internalized among communities. Think about university always come here to help us. That notion of helping, for me, I call that as a tension. And so before we move into global, or international, looking at community engagement from international space or international dimension, I think we need also to address that local tension first. And then we can look at how then we move to that international space where there's always that tension of how do you balance between international pressure and local pressure? Universities are always trying to, or they're striving to compete. They're trying to be like them, how do we, compete at international level? How do we market ourselves? How do we get the best? How do we, play with the big boys, at international rankings, those kind of ranking issues. So, I think for me, that's a tension which we need to address first at local level. And then we can begin to see, how do we manage the tension and at international level? then for me, that would be the first step first, to take. Thank you.
Thank you, Ntimi. Willem, please go ahead.
Yeah, for me, it's the community engagement can be approached in a different way. Several speakers have mentioned it as a way of a new type of research or a new type of action research, where you are not like being patriarchic or saying we know everything and the community knows nothing and we come to help, but rather to find common ground and say, are there very big challenges that we are all facing? For example, I saw a great example in Exeter in the UK. They developed a project about biodiversity in the river. And a lot of the people in that community there, they are very worried about the pollution and the loss of biodiversity. And there are some professors and students who have a lot of knowledge about this. So they set up a sort of project where the population was fully involved in collecting the data and in discussing this issue. And so it's, for me, a perfect example of community engagement, working with people locally who are worried about something and then trying to together to find not only new knowledge, but also find solutions and co-create something else. But it requires completely different attitude from professors, from students, from institutions, because you need another way of working. You cannot just do a literature study and do field work, collecting data with PhD students. You know, it's really different. You have to use different communication tools, different ways of reaching out, different types of meetings, and maybe it's time consuming. But in the end, in Exeter, they told me they really managed to do top level publications out of this. So I would say it's not per se in contradiction with ranking or with international status. It can go together, but it does take a lot of effort, a lot of thinking out of the box and do it differently. But what I also believe is many scientists, academic students are ready to do this, especially in fields like climate change, biodiversity, poverty, or things that are really important in society that we all know that we need to address, and nobody has the answer, and the academics cannot solve it from their ivory tower. They need the streetwise people from the communities. So that's, I see, is a huge opportunity. On the other hand, internationalization, as we discuss now, can make it in a way more difficult if you have international people coming in, not speaking the local language, less aware of local traditions. On the other hand, you can also see this as a huge challenge for students who come somewhere else to really immerse in the local environment and link them to local students. And now in Europe, we are setting up European universities where actually universities from different cities are working on similar solutions or similar challenges in their local communities and then exchange. So that's, for me, a big new avenue that these European universities are taking. It's not, I'm not sure yet if it works. We are trying, and but it's a promising way of developing, I think.
Mariam, please go ahead.
Thanks, Gerardo. I just wanted to add to what's been said, and also to come back to what Ntimi, you said in your presentation, UCE as a means, university community engagement as a means to address global common challenges. And I think exactly what Willem is referring to is the potential of this extremely beneficial connection between internationalization and community engagement, because actually you're only going to fully realize the benefits of internationalization if it is coupled to community engagement, and that universities can actually play a really unique role in this kind of horizontal knowledge exchange and transmission around these global challenges, which play out at the local level. You know, it doesn't help to address them sort of at an abstract level. You need to figure them out. Things like, you know, climate change problems, energy transition problems, they play out at the local level, but we need to share that knowledge horizontally. And so, in fact, internationalization can then be seen as a kind of key part of of scaling up the benefits of community engagement, and equally you're not going to get the benefits of internationalization if you don't, make it sort of land fully. So it really is this connection between the global and the local, which you need to try and fully make. But that is not something, that's something that we need to design for, really. It's not something that our curriculum is already programmed for or designed for. We need a lot of redesign, and fantastic examples that we've been hearing here, which do that. Anyway, that's what I just wanted to add. Thanks.
Gerardo,
Thank you. And yes, of course, Jeannette. Yeah.
Because I think that with all that's been said, I think that we have to go back to how the internationalization must be done, and the paper of the internationalization and the tools that already we have to share that knowledge, to have the possibility of working internationally. We have the cooperative way of production, and the pandemic just makes mandatory for all the institutions to work in a collaborative way with different institutions, not only in the same country, but also abroad. And that makes easier to really strengthen those bridges that they have in the moment. And so they have, for example, solving problems of urbanism in Spain and in Colombia or in Chile, and the students can work out together the solution of those problems and share the solution of those problems. And so I think that what for me is important is that internationalization must be done with ethics. And we've been always talking about the ethics of internationalization and the way that we have to work to look what we're doing between our partners, our equals, and our unequals institutions where we used to work or we work with.
Thank you very much for these responses, and thank you to Agung Nugroho from Indonesia for posting this question that I thought gave us a lot of material to discuss. We're going to take one more question, and I will invite maybe very, very quick responses because time is eluding us very quickly. But this question is from Jan Kripkova from Brazil, and I'm going to try and summarize and do justice at the same time. But the question really is about the possibilities about combining service learning, community engagement, and outreach with virtual exchanges. And maybe if we could expand the question a bit more, what's the possibility of the use of technology, right, for enhancing this community engagement of universities? I will welcome any perspectives from any of our panelists. Marian, yeah, please go ahead. You looked like you were ready to jump in. Please get us started.
Yeah, just a short comment that I think that this blended learning is really a fantastic means to realize exactly this horizontal transfer between institutions, which we really need. I mean, that's one of perhaps the only benefits of the corona pandemic, that we've all sped up on the development of that. And that enables a lot more exchange. Also, I think North-South exchange, where the focus can be much more on reciprocal exchange and not a kind of, as we mentioned before, sort of paternalistic hierarchy of knowledge production. And so I think that there's massive potential there, and that's not something that we have fully realized yet, obviously, because we focus on student mobility, but actually we can do a lot of internationalization while everybody is, as we are now, in our living rooms.
Excellent. Any other takers from our panel? Yeah, Willem and Jeannette, I think you had unmuted, so why don't we go with you and then we'll return to Willem in a moment.
So me? Well, okay.
Yes, please, you go ahead,
Yes,
Jeannette, yes.
There's a lot of examples of the way that technology helps, and it's done not from now. So a long time ago, we had a project that's called City Lab, and that was set to the point. There was the magic of the thing is how the faculty makes the students work together and collaborate between different zones of the world. from Latin America to Europe to Africa, and to solve the problems and to really analyze all the data. And the way that today we have the supercomputers, we have a lot of open science, a lot of things that we can bring to our students that really facilitates the possibility. There are virtual laboratories. There are a lot of tools that can be used. Really, we don't use it. The universities sometimes are not so they don't like that type of changes. The professors really don't like. They want to stay in the comfort, in the place where they don't have to do anything different from what they have to do. And so that's what we have to do. Change the image internally of the institutions, and just to go out and say, we have the tools, we have to work on that.
Great. Willem, please go ahead.
Yeah, I agree that the technology offers a lot of potential, maybe untapped, especially in the international exchange. At the same time, we tried during the pandemic to reach out to communities using technology, and we had a real big problem with that, because it's really about getting to know each other, seeing each other virtually. So we are, even in our university, we have opened small branches of our university in disadvantaged districts of the city to be really present in person, because the personal contact is so crucial for when you do outreach or when you do things in the communities. So I'm a little bit hesitating how far you can go with technology in community outreach. There are definitely limits. We were so happy that the pandemic was over and we could again, do face-to-face meetings and just have dinners together and building trust in that way. But then once you have the connection, yes, you know each other, then you can easily virtually go back and discuss things, then the trust is there. But to build the trust, the technology is still not the best way, I guess.
Thank you. And Ntimi, any final thoughts on these?
I think for me, first of all, this is a very interesting starting point to capitalize on this space of looking at how university community engagement can be an approach to, but also the pathway to understanding, but also to implement, a more expansive notion of internationalization. And I think from, listening to different presenters and the contributors, there are so many areas where we could, find different linkages that connect different places, different institutions, but also different cultures, but the different ways of looking at, how do we do things within higher education, but also what higher education or university can do to global society or global communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And with this, I want to take the opportunity to thank all of our panelists for their valuable perspectives. What a great conversation we've had. And now I would like to turn it over once again to our colleague Giorgio Marinoni from IAU to both provide a summary of some of these perspectives and also to bring our session to a close. Giorgio.
Thank you very much, Gerardo, and thank you very much to all the speakers. And I will not even try to provide a summary of such rich discussion in few minutes, but what I will provide is at least one takeaway that I will have from this conversation today. And my takeaway, and you might have different ones, but my takeaway of today's discussion is really that we need a holistic approach to all the concepts we are treating, like community engagement, societal engagement, internationalization. Because if we are looking in a narrow way, we are running the risk of ignoring a lot of the effects that our action at universities are doing. We cannot think about internationalization and action in internationalization without thinking that they will have an impact on the local community. As in the same way, we cannot disconnect the local and the global, because action at the local will have an impact at global, and global issues, global challenges have an impact at local solution. Therefore, my takeaway is that we have to take a holistic view. We have to think about our relationship with the community, And when I say with the community, I say that it's really a co-process of creation, working together, sharing knowledge in order to solve not only the local, but also the global challenges. And I think this is really the link between internationalization of education and community engagement. Said that, I would like to thank everybody, thank the speakers, the participants, thank the Center for International Education, Gerardo and Rebecca, once more for having organized a very interesting webinar. And I would like to make a couple of announcements before closing. The first one is that this topic of community engagement is also one of the topics that we are investigating in the 6th edition of the Global Survey on Internationalization of Higher Education. And I put here the link to the Global Survey. The Global Survey, Center for International Education, is also a partner in the Global Survey on Internationalization. It's an institutional survey and it's open until the 31st of March. So you still have 1 month to reply. And we would really like to hear your voice and understand what are your views on internationalization and also on the link between internationalization and community engagement. And the second announcement is that we will be pleased to continue this collaboration with the Center for International Education. And we are planning to have another webinar after the summer holidays. We are staying on 2 webinars per year now, but we are also continuing our series separately, both us and the Center for International Education. And I'll take this occasion to invite you already next Tuesday for a webinar on gender equality and equity. And I know that my colleague Isabel already shared with you the link in the chat. So thank you very much. Sorry for having spoken a little bit more than preview and being 2 minutes late, but I really want to thank everybody for today's webinar and looking forward to see all of you at the next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.